With 132 million users and an unrivaled selection of sports trading cards and memorabilia, eBay is the home of collectibles. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Start building your collection today.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and amid Red Bull's slump, Max Verstappen has continued to rack up the points despite his growing winless streak. But how has he responded to being in a less competitive car? And could you make a case for another driver being the star of the season so far? I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to apply their vocal cords to those topics are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Samarth Kanal. Well, Scott, welcome back. You've been away for a little bit. What have you been up to that justifies your absence from the podcast?
Just making the most of this unusual gap in the schedule to just take a few days. My son Oscar, it was his first birthday, so we had a little bit of time with his British side of the family in the UK. Had his first birthday party, and he's also just started nursery this week as well. So yeah, a nice little bit of I would say like calm from the F1 storm. But as I have learned over the last 12 months, my time off now is no such thing. It's just a completely different type of stress and stuff to deal with. But it's been very nice.
Excellent. Yeah, it's actually been relatively relaxed in the world of F1 in this gap. There hasn't been a flurry of stuff going on, but there's always good talking points, and that's why it's nice to be able to step back and tackle a few things that we haven't maybe talked about as much as we should have. And Samarth, well, you've been a bit more frequent on the podcast of late, so no holidays for you. I guess you haven't had time to be up to much since your last appearance.
Oh, yeah, no, thankfully not. I've just been preparing for the next podcast appearance, really. And I'm just, chewing my nails until the next F1 race. And that's all I've been doing, Ed. Although I was watching the NASCAR on Sunday, and I think it was a really close finish there. That was fun, but it's not quite scratching the itch.
You don't enjoy 28 car crashes, then?
Oh, that was carnage. Although the finish was 0.06 seconds or something, which was cool. So there was that. But yeah, it was pretty much, if you've never seen NASCAR and you're going to imagine a NASCAR race, that is what you'd imagine.
That was the one that was, four wide and 7 deep for several laps, wasn't it?
Yeah, at the end, yeah. Although I didn't stay up that late, I'll have to admit. It was a school night.
Great advocate for NASCAR there. Yeah, I didn't stay up to watch this race, but you guys definitely should.
We're not going to get into dissecting NASCAR. That's a topic for an entirely different podcast, let alone entirely different episode. Scott, before we get into our main topics, it's worth just updating us on what's going on with Andretti. I'm sure people will have heard about Michael Andretti's role in some way changing or leaving. So what have you found out about what's going on there?
So Andretti's stepped back basically from the direct leadership of Andretti Global, obviously the organisation that bears the family name. He's decided it's time now to pass the baton to his business partner, that's Dan Tauris. It's not entirely clear what it's going to mean because Andretti still says he'll take a a more strategic role, which will, who knows what that means in real terms, but what that means for who takes on overall leadership of the various initiatives, including the F1 program, is obviously still to be determined. But he says he'll remain engaged and will continue to serve as a strategic advisor and key ambassador, which might only mean he has more time to focus on the project, the F1 project, in the background. I would say, before we go any further, that Michael Andretti being in a strategic role and an ambassador might not be the best thing for the F1 project, given how it had been handled and the lack of success that it's ultimately had when he has been in charge.
Yeah, Mario's a great ambassador for things, isn't he? Michael, a slightly different character. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the background, that project's been going on full steam ahead. There's been no hesitation, no lifting from not getting the entry. They're still laser focused on getting in for 26 or
continued at pace, as they said several times over the course of the year. They've loved to use that phrase. Work continues at pace.
Excellent. But obviously there's the talk about, well, the door's open for 2028, but until they can actually get a process for 28 and some kind of assurance, then I don't think you'll take that seriously. But it's interesting, isn't it, Samarth, that this team, that they're probably just in the wider world, there's a bit of a groundswell of support for them coming in. So positive things are happening, even if it's not entirely clear exactly what it means.
Yeah, it's really interesting that like they've almost set it up as if they're going to be an F1, and that is it. Obviously, I don't think they've endeared themselves to F1 themselves with the approach that they've taken, perhaps. And that's not me criticizing them. That's just me being realistic about how they've gone about things. So what you said about the ambassador role, I'd agree with Scott. I think they've been quite aggressive, and perhaps that hasn't, perhaps the higher-uppers in F1 haven't really appreciated their approach to trying to enter the sport. But it is great to see a new factory, and I'm all for another team. I mean, if we've got space on the grid, why not use it, right?
Well, the 11th slot on the grid is currently being used up by the fictional team, obviously, for filming the F1 movie, which was quite brilliant when that appeared in the middle of 2023, given one of the emerging arguments was that there wasn't space for the 11th team. We've obviously covered that in the past. What I'm interested in with this is whether or not it actually has any meaningful impact in terms of Andretti's real role in the background. And then as a consequence of that, what direction the project takes thereafter. Because Andretti was the figurehead and literally the name of it. But everything I've heard suggests that Taurus is the one who is kind of potentially a better fit from a manager point of view. Andretti rubs people up the wrong way, and there are some question marks over his ability to actually manage an organisation of that size. But there's also the real money in the background, the investor behind it all, whose brands sort of appear everywhere, and that's not Andretti, despite obviously that being the organisation itself. I think it's actually Mark Waters, who is the Guggenheim CEO. He's a Andretti investor. He's invested in the LA Dodgers. He's invested in Chelsea Football Club. I think that's the real money. So what I'm really keen to see now is whether or not Andretti Global, regardless of what it's actually called and whether it keeps the Andretti name, is just a vessel for that side of things to get into F1 with General Motors and Cadillac. Because the GM and Cadillac side is what FOM was interested, FOM, Formula One Management, at the start. When they were rejecting Andretti, you mentioned it earlier, Ed, they left the door open for 2028 when it would be the General Motors Works team, when they supposedly will have their own engine. I am aware of at least one team that last year had some kind of conversation about whether or not GM and Cadillac could be decoupled from Andretti. And if the Andretti side was unsuccessful, maybe they could still come in with an existing team. That's got to still be a possibility, because I think I can think of at least a couple of teams on the grid who would benefit from aligning with a major US manufacturer like General Motors and the Cadillac brand. But there's also the prospect there of like, right, okay, if you have a new person in charge of Andretti Global, which as an organisation has expanded massively, it has invested heavily, it's got the new base that's costing, $200 million in Indiana. It's got the UK satellite facility. It's been hiring some technical people like Nick Chester, and Pat Simmons is going there from F1 as well, as a consultant or advisor, whatever his exact role is. There's a lot going on that makes that organisation quite interesting, even if exactly how it's set up and if it can succeed being massively based in the US is a bit of a question mark still. You're not just going to throw all that out. But what you might do, genuinely, is detach from the Andretti name. If F1's already said, Liberty's already said it doesn't think the Andretti name brings that much, it's associated with Michael, even though he's not going to be the day-to-day leader at the top dog anymore, and he caused some problems. So maybe the best way for this organisation and for those big brands, both the person with all the money and all the companies that currently sponsor Andretti's teams in IndyCar, for example, and also Cadillac and GM, if they want to get on the grid, they'll get on the grid, won't they? They won't necessarily do it only if they can do it with the Andretti name. So I'm really curious to see how it plays out from here. I think it's too early to say for sure whether this will help, but I think it has the possibility to reset the board and potentially draw a line under this mess, because obviously there's an investigation going on in the US that Liberty talked about in August. I think that's the Department of Justice in the United States over the antitrust stuff. So there's a lot swirling around at the moment, and actually maybe a change of leadership on the Andretti side can calm some of that, break the impasse, and maybe open up a couple of different doors that were previously closed.
Yeah, you can certainly see the benefit of it being seen as maybe more General Motors-y, and also perhaps moving away from the failed gunboat diplomacy that they've tried to use to get onto the grid in the past on the Andretti side. So yeah, good luck to them. Interesting to follow how that progresses.
You saw that play when your QB dropped back, looked off the safety, and threw a dime deep for the go-ahead touchdown. That's not just hall-worthy, that's wall-worthy, and you can own a piece of it when you shop the unrivaled selection of trading cards and memorabilia on eBay, the home of collectibles since 1995. Huddle up with 132 million users around the world to find that rookie patch auto you can't find anywhere else. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Plus, with eBay Authenticity Guarantee for trading cards, you know that what you buy is the real deal. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's right, your collecting journey kicks off right here, right now at ebay.com/theathletic. Come through and collect with us today.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Well, let's move on to our main topic now, Samarth. Max Verstappen. He won 7 of the first 10 Grand Prix. He's now without a victory in the last 8. How would you say he's dealt with Red Bull's struggles in terms of his personal performance level?
I think he's dealt with it admirably, Ed. I think he hasn't won in Spain, and what we've seen is that the issues with Red Bull's car become more pronounced, and Max Verstappen has been struggling a lot more, which has kind of vindicated Sergio Perez's side of struggles, really. But Max Verstappen has still outpaced him in recent races, and he's done a fantastic job. I mean, he still leads the Drivers' Championship by a healthy margin. And considering he's been struggling with the issues, I mean, he's been very vocal about them. There's no lie. I mean, he's a brutally honest person, and I can't imagine what he's like behind the scenes. Scott, maybe you could shine a light on that. But yeah, he's done as good as a job as I think he could have done. And recent results definitely reflect that. Second in Singapore was excellent. I think he rescued a couple of results in Italy and Azerbaijan. Sure, they were kind of hovering around the top 5, but to get second at home, absolutely brilliant. Again, I mean, I think there's not much more Max Verstappen could have done in the last few races.
I think he's left a couple of results on the table. Not massive differences, but there have been a couple of weekends where he hasn't been at his best. I think he lost control a little bit in the Hungarian Grand Prix, for example. I think his Azerbaijan weekend was weaker than Sergio Perez's overall. And he was saved by Perez's crash with Carlos Sainz. Otherwise, he would have finished behind him in the race there. And that's just focusing on the most recent stuff, not even going back to things like Austria, when he obviously had those run-ins and eventually that clash with Lando Norris. But what I would say with Verstappen is those incidents have felt to me like the one or two occurrences over a season that can always happen. We know Max does have these little moments where there can be little tiny misjudgments in battle that then have a big consequence, especially when he becomes under pressure in a very specific way, losing control of a race. That's kind of what happened in Austria and in Hungary, when things are going against him and he just doesn't quite have everything in his grasp. And once or twice a year, especially with a car that doesn't respond so well to his inputs and isn't working the way that he wants it to do, aka has a little bit of understeer, that's the very oversimplified way of saying it, can just be slightly off it. So those events have happened. We have seen that. It's not like he has got every single point possible over the last 8 races, the winless run or whatever. But I think what he has done is responded to some of those setbacks that I mentioned really well. And I think it's races like Zandvoort and Singapore, those kind of events that show the caliber he is and the level he's actually performing at when the car's no longer the fastest. And I'll be curious to see what you think of this, Ed. And it's not an exact parallel, but I see a little bit of the Button-Brawn 2009 season in the way that this is playing out. Very different circumstances. It's not like Red Bull doesn't have the money to put new parts on the car or anything like that. But just in terms of that, you mentioned the dominant start that then fades into a run of just not being able to win while others come to the fore.
Yeah, competitive shape-wise in terms of the car performance, yes, albeit almost with even more cars being a bit more of a threat at times. But the difference is that Button did get a bit shaky in that run. And he was struggling because, remember, in that back end of the season, Barrichello won twice. He won at Valencia and Monza, and Button didn't win after Turkey, I think. So I would say if you look at what Verstappen's doing, one thing we can say about him, he hasn't failed to win a race he could have won this season, through his fault anyway. Could have won Australia. That was a brake problem. Could have won Miami. That was a safety car timing, although he did contribute to it with that chicane cutting moment. But
could he not have won Austria?
Well, yeah, Austria is a bit of an unusual one, isn't it? Because I sort of think had that race played out normally, without the safety car and everything, then he probably would have done anyway. So yeah, the clash with Norris there was a little bit unnecessary. But it's interesting. You said that sort of these little things start to happen, and that is the case when you're in more of a battle. It's easier to be perfect and execute really well when you're at the front. But certainly if you look at it in terms of opportunities left on the table, points left on the table, yeah, there's been a few, and I'd add Monaco to that as well, because in qualifying he just went a little bit too hard at Sandoval and clipped the wall, and he could have been on the podium. They couldn't have won, I don't think, but he could have been up with that lead group. So second, third, fourth, fifth was maybe possible. So he's still got 52 points leading the championship. So I think globally, although there have been a few points where things have been left on the table, he's maintained that gap. He certainly performed pound for pound better than Norris over this spell, I would say.
I would also say this is tracking to be better than the 22 and 23 title wins, because there's been that adversity to overcome, and his performance during that adversity compared to his rivals, as you've just mentioned there, Ed, I think is extremely high. And I think the fact that is the points gap between them now exactly the same as it was after Miami. It's really, I think it might be exactly the same, which reflects really well on Verstappen for that to be the case. And also, like, not Red Bull from a performance point of view, but in terms of an operational point of view, I think they'll probably take some pride from that, even if ultimately it's a disappointment for the team because the car's not as competitive as it was before.
It was 53 points after Miami, so one more. So yeah, that's it's really hard to do that. And I would say you could argue that if he closes out the championship from here and on the current trajectory, I think he can, even if you don't factor in the potential for improvements in Austin with the expected upgrade. That would be, you could say that's arguably as good as the 21 title, if not better, just because of the way it's done.
That was going to be my question to you, because do you think he's performing? Okay, ignore the title element, but do you think he's performing this season better than he did in 21 when Hamilton, obviously, they pushed each other to incredible heights that year, but Verstappen had, I think, bigger lows in 2021, not necessarily in terms of pure performance, but obviously by the end of the year, Jeddah, I think, Interlagos and Jeddah were moments where he went way too far. And that's a very specific thing that obviously he hasn't been pushed into doing in 2024. He hasn't been in the circumstances that, quote unquote, merit it. But I don't know. I feel like because the nature of the way 21 played out, the peaks and troughs are just much more extreme than they are this year.
Yeah, I haven't seen him struggling to deal with certain things as he did on a couple of occasions towards the end of 21. I think he's coped. You could probably say the exception is maybe Hungary, but he's coped with things not going so well and being harder. Generally, I think better, whereas there were times...
And a bit of Austria, the final stint.
Yeah, Austria was sort of desperately trying, and that sort of thing can happen, but yeah, whereas you get to a race like, say, Jeddah in 21, and he was just overreaching too much, which he wasn't doing most of that season. So, but that's experience, isn't it? And it's a different set of circumstances, but I don't know what you make of it, Samarth. He's looking every bit the sort of the champion, isn't he? We've seen occasionally championship wins like this where you start very strongly, and we should add, I don't think many other drivers would have got those 7 out of 10 Grand Prix victories in the first part of the year. He was very much papering over the cracks, but he's been very convincing just in terms of putting together a season, hasn't he?
Yeah, excellent. And I think part of that is because he hasn't got the pressure of that first title hanging over him. I think because he's already accomplished that now, he cuts a far more relaxed, perhaps isn't the word, because you can see kind of cracks starting to form sometimes in the whole system at Red Bull, where he's infuriated about the understeer problems that they've got. But I will say that he cuts a far more confident and kind of almost nonchalant, in a sense that he's already won the title, so he doesn't feel the pressure of having that first title. It's just a lot easier in a sense now that he's got it, and he almost talks about his future in F1. You know, he said that I won't be doing 200 more races. I think now that he's accomplished one, he's thinking about other things a lot more. You know, he's happy to focus on sim racing, focus on things outside F1, and he's almost become a little bit more philosophical and mature this season, which has helped him get those results consistently. I mean, yeah, you're right. You know, he hasn't won in ages, and perhaps Austria was, I would say, the low point that sticks out this season, because I think Norris would have had track limits anyway before that silly collision. But, you know, apart from that, just an excellent job throughout. It will probably be the consolation for Red Bull this season, because I just don't think that they're going to rescue that Constructors' Championship. But we'll see what happens in Austin. I don't know the nature of the upgrade that they've got. I don't know if you can, you know, as the old cliche goes, there's no silver bullet, there's no magic bullet that you can just kind of bring to the car. So I don't expect it to turn around Red Bull's fortunes there, but, you know, stranger things have happened, right? You know, there's always a chance that a team as accomplished as Red Bull can turn it around. I just don't believe they will.
There's no reason not to think that Red Bull will improve the car to the point where it can have 2 cars theoretically in contention for the rest of the season. That's possible. What I seriously doubt is possible is turning it around so much that they can now also overcome a 40-point deficit to a McLaren team that has a stronger driver lineup. Because at worst, I would expect McLaren to be on a par with Red Bull on balance over the final 6 races. Like, that to me feels like a guarantee. I think Red Bull could offset a lot of the deficit, but I don't think they're going to go out now and dominate all 6 events and have both cars up there. And I think that's what they need really to turn it around. With Verstappen though, however these final 6 races shake out, I think he has enough points in hand and also He'll have enough from the car to see it over the line. And if he does that, I think he will look back at he won this championship in Canada and Spain. There's just extending that sequence of being on top, just delaying the arrival of McLaren and mostly Norris, but often Piastri as well, as the actual leading force in F1 race by race, has just had enough of a swing. Because if he doesn't win those races, and if Norris wins those races, that swing is more than enough to put that title massively in jeopardy right now. And it's that kind of thing, rather than, for example, team orders, which has just become such a dominant topic around McLaren and Norris's title hopes. It's those things that will be the difference at the end of the season, because those things weren't just lost points for Norris; they were massive points gains for Verstappen as well. And he had his moments around then. I almost said I think he won this championship in June, and you could argue that he did, considering what happened in Austria cost Norris a load of points, and Verstappen actually extended his points lead, but that maybe conveys a little bit too much of a sense that Verstappen was superb in June and flawless, whatever. But I think on reflection, June will become very, very important in the championship picture. But it's those two races, those two wins, when Verstappen, just to pick up on the point you made, Ed, won races that I think other drivers and maybe other teams wouldn't have won. That has ultimately had a massive impact on the trajectory of the championship.
You could maybe creep that back a few weeks and say to mid-May as well and include Imola, because that was the other win they got when McLaren definitely had the pace to have done it as well. So that there was that interesting phase of the season, because I think post the break, the McLaren has been clearly the best car. It's the best all-rounder. You know, that there's weekends where it's utterly dominant, and there's weekends when others are a threat, but it's still always there in the mix. Whereas, yeah, that little phase and those three wins, particularly Canada and Spain, certainly, plus Imola as well, where things are a little bit more balanced up. So it's fascinating, because I think this ability Max has got, you alluded to it, Samarth, with the fact that he's got other things going on. I have a suspicion that as well the experience of 21 has probably helped, insofar as 21 you feel like, because there's been this long build-up with Red Bull where he was operating at such a high level and desperately waiting for the car, and then he got it, whereas I feel like that almost became a consuming thing, and that was such a long, I mean, it was a gruelling season to cover because there was so much going on, there was so much intensity in that battle, and I feel like he wasn't so good at sort of compartmentalising it and being away from the race and sort of detuning from it, and so inevitably he was probably quite tired by the end of the season, which wouldn't have helped. So
well, by the time we got to Abu Dhabi, it was the first time and probably the only time I can remember Verstappen admitting he was actually feeling it. You know, he was nervous, he was amped up, and Max is usually pretty immune to those kind of feelings, and I think that was obviously a big part of that was the occasion. You know, it was a proper winner takes all finale, effectively, but I think that was also the sum of everything that had come before it, because if he was in a much more relaxed state of mind, like he generally is, I don't think he would be admitting to those kinds of feelings. So it's interesting how he has handled it. The other thing as well that is worth mentioning on this note is the off-track stuff this season that has potentially been a massive destabiliser. I wonder if the way it's been resolved might have been deliberate from the Verstappen side, in terms of those supposed summer talks with Toto Wolff. Look, it's not going to happen for 25. Let's pause it for now, because the season was getting away from him and Red Bull. And it would not surprise me if that was a conscious decision of, actually, all this noise is a bit of a distraction for Red Bull. It might be a distraction for Max. We need to park this. His sole focus needs to be on closing out 24. So I wonder if that was deliberate, rather than just those conversations with Wolff and Mercedes have just run their course for now. I wonder if it was a line in the sand being drawn, because there's been so much off track to destabilise the team and Verstappen. And I think we've been saying, we've written this, we've podcasted about it, we've done YouTube videos on it since Bahrain, that sooner or later, this would creep in to the trackside stuff, the actual on-track performance and results. From the Christian Horner saga at the start of the year, the Horner-Jos Verstappen feud, the Marco uncertainty, the power struggles, the lingering Verstappen exit rumours, everything has just persevered at the time when the car's becoming less competitive, and that it's creaking under the strain of absolutely everything. We've got more departures now. high-profile departures, which Jos Verstappen says he's been warning about for months. But taking away that Merc element has just quietened down a very Max-specific thing. And so I wonder if that was deliberate, and I also wonder if that has helped, because just to what you said, Ed, when you've got other stuff kind of pulling you away from focus, if you can't compartmentalise it, it can have an impact.
Yeah, and I think we'll only really see the full picture a few years down the line, but it feels like Red Bull is a team that its foundations are kind of being whittled away at, and there's Verstappen still there, papering over the cracks. And if he closes out this championship on current trajectory, he should, or he can, then I think it will stand as a hugely impressive one. Almost a bit like, say, 91 when Senna won the title in a McLaren that started the season strongly, then was becoming less competitive against Williams. Very, very different reasons for that. That was still a team that was working well, but just the rise of Williams, etc. This is more complicated, but it is strange that for all of the maelstrom that has been Red Bull at times this year, Max himself, I think, has done a very, very good job of keeping. I don't know, I mean, Samarth, you've been at a lot of races and heard from him a lot. He's very good, isn't he, at making sure he's never at the centre of that storm, even though his role as a Red Bull driver sort of places him there. He's able to sort of move to the side and watch it and detach himself. That's quite a skill.
I think both Red Bull drivers are pretty good at actually probably keeping themselves away from what could be a potentially massive mess at Red Bull. And the one man that seems to love being in the middle of it is Christian Horner sometimes, with his punchy comments and he's very confident. In a way, I wonder if he does that to deliberately deflect away from his drivers and protect them, and also his staff. I mean,
well, he does believe that very. I mean, all team principals believe this, but he's always played that game of you back your driver. I know you can talk about treatment of second drivers, etc., but generally he sees the role as to protect the drivers, except perhaps on occasions when he's putting the pressure on.
Yeah, I think he's very good at that. I think it takes a real skill. I mean, Christian Horner does say some things that are sometimes questionable. I mean, most recently there was a comment about, I think he threw some shade, so to speak, at the McLaren drivers and their team orders controversy thing. Well, I wouldn't call it controversy, but the team orders that they did. And he said, you're paying one of them 5 times more than the other. But I think things like that are a deliberate ploy to deflect away from the situation at Red Bull, in a sense. It kind of takes the heat off. It's really well done. And going back to Verstappen, yeah, it takes a real maturity and also this kind of weird, ruthless talent that a lot of F1 drivers have to keep away from things that might affect you on track. It takes some sort of like stoicism to turn up every week and almost, I wouldn't say pretend, but you're almost acknowledging that something bad is happening in the background, but you're also just compartmentalizing, doing a really good job on track. It's almost this robotic will to just concentrate on the wheel rather than anything else that's going on. I think Verstappen's definitely got that ruthlessness, that edge, and he's shown it this season.
Yeah, and that probably does partly come from being 27 now, the experience he's got in life and in Formula One. I think he'd have struggled more were he the 2021 Max Verstappen. That's not really a criticism of him then, because we always talk about the fact you have to go through these experiences. You only really get hard cured by the intense competition of a championship fight. And that's what Norris is going through, which is why, some people are quite willing to write him off completely. But he has been a bit erratic this season, Norris, in comparison, and that's been the point of difference. But it's his first time, and it's been a slightly weird trajectory of the season for him. So that's why I'm willing to give Norris just that time to settle and see how he comes back next year, etc. And Norris could yet, because he's got the car to string together a load of race wins, and I keep sort of saying Norris is never quite in it, but he's one sort of big swing away from being right there. But at the same time, if his engine fails in Austin and Verstappen wins, say, then the championship's pretty much won because of the diminishing number of points available. So yeah, really, really interesting. And I'm pleased we've been able to talk about how well Verstappen's driving, because quite often recently he's almost been a bit part player in the storyline, and it's been, why aren't Red Bull able to do this? And in amongst it, Verstappen's been nailing it, which we've referenced plenty of times. But yeah, it's good to be able to reflect on it.
I think it's also good for him and his kind of F1 legacy. I know he won't care about it, but just to have a championship like this, a season like this, in which he's gone through a very different kind of adversity, because there is a big part of the F1 fan base, especially the Hamilton fan base, of course, given what happened, that has an asterisk of some kind against his 2021 title, which was earned in very different circumstances to 22 and 23. And that is not a specific reference to Abu Dhabi in terms of earning it. That's in terms of how the season played out. A real absolute to and fro fight from the very first round of the season. Really, really, really hard fought. 22 and 23. 22 did very well to come back, but then steamrolled everybody, and 23 was just utter dominance. This season looked like it was going to go the same way, had a lot of noise to deal with off track, had a slump from Red Bull to deal with on it, an absolute resurgence from a rival, and then other teams in the mix too. This is a proper title earned if he becomes world champion, as it looks like he will be. And I think that has to be good for a driver to have that, rather than have a string of titles in which it's just earned by total dominance. You look at the Hamilton-Mercedes era, for example, and what probably annoys me, to be honest, about how the Hamilton era is kind of perceived is it's so easily overlooked what he did in 17 and 18 in terms of overcoming the Ferrari-Sebastian Vettel combination. Those were really hard-earned titles that have been kind of a bit revisionist in terms of how some people review them because of the strong end to the season or the ultimate points gap or something like that. But the championships where you have to really, really fight for it, and you do end up, regardless of what the final points difference ends up being, actually beat your opposition rather than just dominate over the course of a year. Those are, I think they're worth more. As they have to be worth more to drivers who are competitive at heart.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. Domination, relentless winning takes something pretty extraordinary, because more drivers fail in that situation to maximise it than can just string race win after race win after race win. But yeah, I'd agree that this sort of situation is much, much more challenging. It's a very, very different kind of racing, kind of managing that lead. And Verstappen has managed that lead brilliantly because, as you say, basically since Miami, if you think of it just as a single race, he was that many seconds ahead, and he's still that many seconds ahead despite being in a less good position car performance-wise. So, fascinating to see how the rest of the season plays out. But, he's put himself in a mighty position, and Red Bull have a lot to thank Max Verstappen for this year.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features, like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. And best of all, Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, allowing you to work smarter, not longer. For 15 years, Grammarly has helped professionals do more with their writing. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Well, let's move on to the driver who you could say was arguably the second best driver of the season, maybe even a rival to Verstappen as driver of the season. You recently interviewed him. How does Charles Leclerc regard his year, Scott?
I think he's very pleased with his performances, but he calls it very emotionally contrasting as a season. Ferrari's years have been quite volatile the last couple. The high is very high, the low is very low. And this year, I think the way Charles put it when I spoke to him was that he's won the 2 races he dreams of winning. You know, he's won Monaco for the first time and he's won Monza again. But they've had some real stinkers, Ferrari. You know, none worse than Canada. But and you know, that run after Monaco was bad. And there's still issues with that team and their car in terms of how specialised it seems to be in terms of where it excels. But I think Leclerc has been largely excellent this season. Had a little bit of difficulty at the very start of the year, particularly in qualifying. But really, since I would say the race in Japan onwards, I'm really struggling to recall any moments where you go, I don't know what he was playing at there. I mean, he partially contributed to his own downfall in Austria.
Yeah, I think Austria was probably the low point just in terms of a few decisions.
A few imperfections, certainly, that had big consequences. But apart from that, there have been a lot more cases of overachieving for starters. First of all, just in qualifying, putting that just the classic Leclerc thing of putting the car somewhere on the grid it probably shouldn't be, which then makes him look worse on Sundays because he regresses, and it's the classic Leclerc narrative. But also just some Sunday performances where, and we have talked about this a little bit in some of the post-race podcasts, I think, Leclerc's race day skills, time management, race management, everything, they're so underrated because he is definitely one of the absolute best on the grid at that. And that's why he has podiums in races he shouldn't have a podium. It's not just poles or front rows or whatever. And you know, his performance in winning at Monza was absolutely excellent. So, yeah, there's 6 races to go. I'm trying not to jump to conclusions with it, but right now, I am struggling to separate Verstappen and Leclerc for my number 1 driver of 24.
Yeah, I'm not going to cite that this is the ideal objective metric, but just looking back, I've got a spreadsheet of my driver rankings positions, and he's a little bit behind Verstappen on average, but not by much. But there's loads of these good forgotten weekends, because even those 2 wins, the run-ups to them were really strong. Like Monaco, he won. But China, Miami, Imola, he was really impressive. But they don't leap to mind. I've got him ranked 2nd in my driver rankings for those 3 weekends. Likewise, Belgium, Zandvoort and Monza, I've got him as number 1 performer overall. And again, Zandvoort was a really good one. Belgium was as well, but they don't necessarily spring to mind. And there's a lot of this in Leclerc's season. And, you know, most of the bad weekends, mentioned Austria. I mean, Silverstone wasn't great, but he wasted Friday. Well, not wasted. He sacrificed Friday to run the new package, back to backing it with Sainz in the old package to help them understand. And he just said all weekend, I'm just miles behind because of that, but this data's useful. And he was right. So he's also playing the team game.
Yeah, can Samarth and I play a little game with your Leclerc spreadsheet?
If you like.
Can we try and guess his average ranking position so far?
I can do. Do you want any context of it, or do you just want to have a punt at the average number? This is just a mean average of
I think a mean
numbers.
average. I'll let Samarth go first.
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot, huh? Let's go for...
I'd like it to 9 decimal places, please.
9 decimal, yeah, of course, as I often put numbers. I'm going to go for... I want to say 3.2.
3.2.
9 decimals did you want, Ed? I was going to go for 3.14159.265.
Very pie.
Very pie. No, I was actually, in all seriousness, I was going to say 3.4. That was the number that I had in mind, because the way that the rankings are means that in any individual weekend, obviously someone could have had an absolute stunner who's not necessarily that high. So to be first overall in the averages, I think you might have a slightly higher number than people might assume. But I think 3.4 feels about right.
It has gone a little bit high. He's actually at 4.8, which I'd still consider very good. At the moment, Verstappen's at 4.1. I mean, for context, Verstappen last year's average was 2.36 to 2 decimal places, which was extraordinarily high just because, like I say, it's really difficult to dominate, but it does slightly simplify the challenge because you can get away with weekends where there's a little bit of performance left on the table, but it doesn't really show up and it's quite hard to detect. So, that works well. But last year, Leclerc was 2nd as well, but he was averaging 6 last year. So
that number's, just to put it into some context for people, I genuinely think this is really useful to hear, because what that means is so far, and I disagree with you, Ed. I think you're the ultimate arbiter for how good a driver's season has been, and therefore your rankings are definitive.
Many would disagree.
I think what we're saying is that, on average, Charles Leclerc produces one of the top 5 performances every single weekend, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's effectively the way I would characterise that.
And also, that's high praise, because the standard in F1 is sky high. You know, often I'll do a ranking and someone will be 13th, and I'll look at it and I'll think, they've had a pretty good weekend relative to the car, but everyone's operating at such a high level that to be consistent, like the numbers, if you read them along, there's a lot where he is in the top 5. And there's a few where he's in the bottom half of the top 10, and only a couple in double figures. But yeah, that's a really strong, consistent set.
It's just interesting because when you look at it like that, and the form that he's on at the moment, that number could easily come down. But to be able to do that, and it's not every week in, week out, obviously, but it pretty much is. And I also think like that number would obviously come down if you just excluded every single driver's, worst weekend. If you got rid of the biggest outliers or the anomalies or whatever you want to call them, it would come down even further, because I would imagine he's well outside the top 10 for Austria, for example, which must be massively anomalous.
Yeah, he was down in 16th, and Silverstone he was 13th, and those sorts of races are difficult because there's reasons for it. As I mentioned with how he sacrificed Friday, but it's very, very hard to kind of compensate for that. You can't say, well, if he hadn't done that, he'd have done this, this, and this. It's like, well, on that particular weekend, he did that, which is why individual weekends are quite tricky in that regard. But yeah, it's a useful little guide because it also helps me keep track of how well I think people have been performing over the whole season. Just by I don't look at the averages very often, just in case they affect things. But I thought it was worth doing at this point. So yeah, it's an interesting little thing, and I think Samarth, perhaps what we talked about there, says that this idea of Leclerc as just this ferociously quick qualifying driver who's a bit all over the place in races is just, I mean, it was never really true. There was a point where he was making more errors in races, but the errors this year have been insignificant. There have been a few weekends where Sainz has been really strong, particularly early on. But even those little Sainz runs where he's the stronger Ferrari driver are normally quite localised. And Leclerc just keeps banging in those performances.
Yeah, he's proven himself, hopefully now, to any doubter that he is one of the best on race pace. He's been the best on race pace on some weekends. Just so impressive and so consistent over long stints. And, in a Ferrari that seems kind of peaky, some kind of difficult to nail down sometimes, he's done a really good job. What I'm interested to see if he can keep that up next year with Hamilton next to him. I believe he can, actually. What's funny, we were talking about earlier about Verstappen kind of being cured and moulded by the hardships of 2021, let's put it that way. I think Leclerc's had plenty of years. And if you're at Ferrari, you've got calloused hands there. You're ready for whatever comes next. So I think, I've been really impressed by him this year. And I'm happy that your rankings have put him in, as a top 5er. Because that is a seriously hard thing to do in a Ferrari that's just been so up and down. And I'm confident that next year he can just continue that. I think he's probably at a stage now where if you put him in a championship winning car, he'd go and win that championship easily. It's never easy. Nothing's ever easy in F1, but he'd go and win that championship. He's capable of winning the races that other people wouldn't, I'd say.
Yeah, and this doesn't come from nowhere because he's been very strong in previous seasons as well. But yeah, he's just sort of quietly amid the fluctuations of Ferrari making some very, very good progress. So yeah, I'd love to see him in a proper championship winning car and see how he fares. He sort of flirted with it a bit in 2022, but that wasn't really a championship winning car, but it felt like it was a championship battle early on. There are a few mistakes there as well, but yeah, performing really, really well. Let's move on to our final topic now, Samarth, because we haven't talked about Renault canning its F1 engine programme since it became official, so we'll change that now. Group Renault CEO Luca de Meo has spoken to the French press. What do you make of his laments about the struggles to make Alpine the French Ferrari?
I think they're kind of brutally realistic in a sense. But I also think it's a massive shame not to have a works team. So what he's saying is, it's not a priority to have a works engine. They're moving to probably Mercedes, and the team needed to do this for financial reasons, to save the team almost. I think it's just brutally pragmatic, really. And it kind of underlines what happens in Formula One, where it can spiral out of control if you're not winning races, if you're not getting performance. I mean, it can go the other way where you can invest in the team and you can spiral upwards, let's say. But Alpine never managed that. And I mean, part of it seems like De Meo should probably take more responsibility for that, for sure. But in a sense, this is taking responsibility.
No, he's CEO. Remember, CEOs, every success of a company is theirs. Every failure is someone else's. That's why they're CEOs.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah.
There are some exceptions. That's not all of them, but it's quite a common pattern. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're right. No, absolutely. Dare I forget? And I kind of. It's a bit depressing in a sense to lose a works manufacturer from F1. The idealist in me wants to see more of that, but I guess the pragmatist is happy that at least Alpine can save something, salvage something. I read what you wrote, Scott, on the race.com. I'm wondering if you think that De Meo's almost been deflecting from himself and not taking enough responsibility, or it's the other way around?
Well, so far, I think a couple of times, like Flavio Briatore and Oliver Oakes, who obviously Briatore is De Meo's F1 advisor now, Oakes is the latest team principal. They've both kind of backed De Meo and kind of said it's not his fault. He's supported the team and all of this, and it felt a little bit like making excuses for him. And the way De Meo's spoken most of the time does come across massively as finger pointing and like, well, I did everything I could about this, and then everyone else is the ones that have haven't succeeded. He did say in his interview with L'Equipe after this engine decision came out, which Renault in France kind of did announce in a slightly cowardly way from what I can remember, that basically burying it in their kind of Viri stuff that they're that they're going to run down the clock basically on the F1 engine at the end of 25. He did say that he obviously made mistakes in terms of who he appointed, but even that was kind of caveated a bit. Well, it was easy to say that in hindsight. I just put the people I thought were meant to be really good and gave them every chance, but they didn't succeed. So it's my fault. But,
and of course, some of them would say that they were not given every chance, notably Otmar Safnauer.
Yes, exactly, as he has done in a recent podcast appearance. It reminds me a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit off piece, and I'm going to bring together two of my favourite topics here, which is criticising slightly weird F1 ownerships and my beleaguered football club. But my third division football team, Charlton Athletic, is managed by Nathan Jones, who is a manager and person who is very interesting to listen to, and he's kind of quite chaotic, and he's got a strange logic. Charlton lost the other day, and after the game, Nathan Jones came out and said that he took full responsibility. He was the one who picked the team. The team was then rubbish, basically, is what he said, and that the team massively underperformed in every area, but it's my fault because I picked the team. That's a little bit like Luca de Meo, where even when he takes responsibility, there's still at least like a chunk of what he's saying is basically, I'm taking responsibility for other people not doing a good enough job and letting me down. Yeah. And that's kind of how it is when de Meo speaks. But I mean, ultimately, Ed, you must be devastated that we don't have a French Ferrari, which is what de Meo says he was ultimately trying to turn Alpine into.
Well, I'd have liked that. I think that'd have been great fun. I mean, there's two things that strike me here. Firstly, it's got echoes of the scenario we used to see with the French super teams of the past when they were trying to happen, particularly when Ligier was and the Prost project and trying to become the all-French team and expecting the investment from French companies, which sometimes happened, but de Meo's complained about French companies not sponsoring them, so he seems to have blamed them for that. But secondly, connected to that, if you want to be the French Ferrari, then you don't buy your F1 team and say, we're going to do it on 80% of what others do it on. Ferrari's all in. Renault has never been all in on this project, and that's why it's frustrated me a little bit. And there's other things and inconsistencies in what he said. We've talked about the fact they seem to be shaping up to sell. Now, he said in that interview with L'Equipe that, we're not going to sell because the team will soon be worth 3 to 5 billion, which made me think, well, you sold 24% of this team for what, a couple of €100 million? And that deal was completed at the end of 23, wasn't it?
Yes.
In terms of actually finally being done. So is that good business? Doesn't sound like good business to me.
How badly must you have misjudged it 12 months ago that you didn't foresee the price and value of your team skyrocketing? Because that deal valued it at around 800 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, which even at the time seemed a little bit cheap. And it just goes right from the start of when they bought the Enstone team, reacquired it right at the end of 2015. It's always just been trying to do this great thing. It's like, look, I've been trying to do this great thing with it. But it's like, well, you haven't, because you haven't done what it takes to become the French Ferrari. That's the frustration. Now, ultimately, it's very, very easy to be critical of car companies in F1 because often they underachieve. And Renault, as a team ownership, as a team owner, it's been most effective when it was the least involved, which was in that middle of the 2000s with Flavio Briatore having kind of proper executive control. So yeah, a lot of it just rings a little bit hollow to me. That I don't feel like they've done everything they could possibly do. Now, no question, things haven't always been executed perfectly by others. It's not 100%. You can't point the finger completely at De Meo, but I just don't really get it, and I don't think they're laying out their strategy convincingly and throwing around numbers like, in a few years it'll be worth 3 to 5 million or billion rather, or whatever. Just smacks a little bit of, well, we are willing to sell bits at some point down the line, but you've got
it was putting a price tag on it.
Exactly, yeah. We want someone to come to us because there's loads of people. Some even actually have the resources potentially to buy F1 teams inquiring around the place. There's loads of them. Most people will never hear about, but there are ways of doing it. So that's what it feels like more to me, because the last thing you do if you're for sale is say you're for sale, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would just say, picking up on your point about the way that Renault wants to do F1, obviously axing the Works Engine program to become a customer. Look, I get it. It is pragmatic, it is cost effective, and it will probably be better for them in performance terms, because I don't see them ever sorting out Viri properly and having integration or anything like that. So many people have tried and failed. They're either not willing or not able to do it properly, basically. But what that means is that Alpine's given up on being a proper works team. They want a cheaper life, they want an easier life, they want something less expensive. And the bit that worried me the most is De Meo admitting that he's looking for shortcuts, because it conveys a sense of impatience for starters. But it also underlines your point, Ed, which is that Renault's trying to do F1 without doing it properly. And here, I need to stress, we're saying Renault, the company, because I think actually the team itself, look, the team has made mistakes and the team has got things wrong over the last few years. But the best thing I can say about it is this is the team that just under less than 2 years ago was finishing 4th in the championship. It is not a backmarker. It is
ahead
not
of McLaren at that time.
Yeah, exactly. So the team's capable of more than this. And I will say, and Samarth, you were there as well when we heard from Oaks in Baku. I don't know how he came across in Singapore as I wasn't there, but after what felt a little bit like a slightly shaky first kind of public thing between Briatore and Oaks, because obviously Flavio was right there and there were loads of things to get through. Oaks was talking in a slightly more kind of relaxed atmosphere the second time I got to hear from him properly. And I've spoken to other people in the team. I've spoken to Alpine senior figures about kind of what's happening in the next few months. And what they are doing at Enstone is crucially not just assuming that if they get rid of that troublesome Alpine engine and put a Mercedes in, they're suddenly going to be a top 3 team. That they are not making that mistake, which is really important. And I'm getting the impression that what is being saved on the engine program looks like it is going to be, some of it is going to be redirected, because it does look like there is going to be more investment in Enstone, in facilities, in personnel, etc. So I'm optimistic about that, and I'm willing to give Enstone and Oaks and even Briatore the benefit of the doubt, the time to move things there. And I say that strictly from a sporting perspective when I say I'm willing to give Briatore the benefit of the doubt. But I think, given the turnover, if we're going to believe, I don't think Zafnauer did everything right when he was in charge at Alpine, but he clearly didn't get given time. I think Oaks should be given that time now. And if you're going to cheap out on the engine side, Renault needs to go all in on the race team side now. There are no excuses for not helping Enstone fulfill the potential that a lot of people have seen in it over the last 20 years, but it just hasn't really been tapped into since, as you said, Ed, when Renault was in charge of it in the mid-noughties, but it was distanced from the corporate side.
Yeah, and maybe some success can come from that. Perhaps if De Meo has said, right, this is its new future, it's a little bit smaller but pragmatic, just do what you can to make it as appealing as possible to sell, which he, I must stress, says he's not said to them, then yeah, but perhaps that could work, because there are good people there that deserve success. But it is really interesting. I mean, you mentioned that podcast that Otmar Safnauer appeared on. It's well worth listening to. It's the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphrey. That'll give his perspective of how things were going there. But I guess that's the big question for this team, isn't it, Samarth? Can they, with the pragmatism of a Merc engine in 26, do a decent car for the new rules and be kind of at that 2022 level again, which would be a decent level. That would be positive. But they were still fourth best there, and I keep thinking of that thing Pat Fry said when he left, or rather once he joined Williams, was that they felt they were making good progress, but there wasn't the interest and the ownership in doing better than fourth. This almost feels like the manifestation of that.
Yeah, firstly, there's a worry as well of how relevant it is now to the Alpine, the Renault bosses, that they're going to have a Mercedes engine. I mean, when you have a Renault engine, you're almost branding it as a Renault works team, and that means a lot in terms of marketing. Now you have a Mercedes engine. Does that dilute the project a little bit for them? And secondly, going back to your question, I think it's so much up in the air. And when you're not a works team, you're not controlling that. That's the worry, right? So you're buying this Mercedes engine, but you're packaging it in an Alpine. I mean, we've seen in previous kind of rules changes that this sometimes falls apart when you try and do that. That's why you want to be a works team. That's why someone like Aston Martin probably has a massive advantage in becoming a Honda, let's say, works team kind of partner, having their own supplier there. So let's not discount that, and going into a new rule set, that is a really crucial thing to have, I think. I'm not convinced that things will change dramatically for Alpine. And really, as we've said, it comes down to a fundamental approach, a fundamental issue really in the approach that they've got. I mean, if that doesn't change, I don't think anything will.
The thing they're aiming for is basically to do what McLaren's done and basically become F1's best team or have the fastest car when you don't have your own engine in the back of it.
Or pretty much your own rear end, it seems, as well, because they're going to go down the gearbox and suspension route.
Yeah, so the basic principle is, I think, McLaren is achieving great things as a customer, so you don't need to be a works team. And from that marketing side, this just to come on to a point that Samarth made in the start of his answer, that you get nothing out of commercially, really, you get nothing out of being in F1 as an engine manufacturer. You get no revenue back for success because there is no prize money. They talked a while ago about having some kind of engine prize money rewards, but there's nothing of that at the moment. You can obviously market it if you want, but I think there's a finite value to that. But obviously what it normally does is, if you do it properly, being a works team drives your on-track success, which means you earn your money as a team, which Renault does because it is a team. And then also you can sell sponsorship, you can sell shares in your team at a higher price because it's got greater value because it's a successful team. But that's intangible stuff that you can't measure against the bottom line, which is what Alpine's doing. So the big question for me, for the next few years, assuming it does stay under Renault's control, is what do they actually want out of this? And what can they actually achieve in their version of being a customer? Can they replicate what McLaren's done? Do they have to take the pain of the next couple of years by, as you said, if they take the whole Merc rear end, which is a much grander customer arrangement and a potentially much more limiting customer arrangement, and then go in their own direction in 27, 28 in terms of gearboxes, rear suspension, whatever, once they've readjusted, once they are used to no longer being a works team and dealing with someone else's power unit, will that yield any gains? And crucially, what happens if there isn't a massive uptick in form? What happens if they get up to 6th in the World Championship again? What happens if they're 4th or 5th, like you mentioned with what Pat Fry experienced? Are we then going to discover that is actually all Renault needs the Alpine F1 team to be in reality? Or is it going to just be slightly deluded ambition and think that what they have should be achieving more than that, and therefore they won't invest? Because this is the other thing with what Fry was saying. I don't know whether they wouldn't invest because they didn't have any interest in being better than 4th, because they didn't need to be, because it was commercially viable, whatever, or if they just simply thought, we've put enough in, you should be better than 4th anyway, we are not giving you more than this. And but whatever one it is a problem.
It feels like one big hedge to me, in terms of they've made the team sort of a bit smaller. You know, they're thinking, well, let's try and make the best out of this. Maybe we could do a bit of a McLaren, but at the same time, it makes it more appealing to sell. So let's see how it goes. And that's why I think if there is a sale, I would expect it not to be right now unless someone comes with crazy money. I think I think they are genuinely working towards to see how things are in 2026. But there's a hit and hope element to it. It just feels smaller and less ambitious. But this whole Renault F1 project has been one big hedge, as far as I'm concerned, and that's what frustrates me. And throwing away things like we'll be the French Ferrari. Well, if you want to be the French Ferrari, commit to it like Ferrari did, and they committed to it pretty big. They spent big, but not quite big enough. And it makes me think of that time when Mercedes bought Brawn, and there came a point where they realised, because things like the resource restriction agreement weren't working as hoped, they needed to up the investment. And the board eventually committed to it, and they started recruiting more, expanding, etc., etc. Then you got the super team you come today. Renault has never had that point, and their reaction to that point is almost to go smaller again. So it is interesting, though. You talking about the works team thing, I thought back to an interview I did with Andrea Stella earlier this year, and I asked him about that, and I said, well, obviously you're going well with this, but there's still a performance limitation in terms of being a customer team of performance you can't get, even if it's only a notional couple of tenths, I think I put it to him. And he said, well, yeah, that's logical, although I'd struggle to even think there is 2 tenths nowadays in that, which I think is fine. But also, this is McLaren that's built up a relationship with Mercedes, that's doing its own rear end and suspension, and how important the mechanical platform is. So McLaren's doing the best possible version of this customer team. And I would still say that in this hypothetical world where Mercedes and McLaren get 100% of their performance potential extracted, Mercedes will just be ahead. And that's a very theoretical thing, because that easily gets lost in the noise, because nobody does that. But then Alpine is doing a reduced version of this.
Yeah, well, basically you've got a situation where you have a works team, you have McLaren, which is setting up something where it feels like it is a pseudo works team, because it just has a little bit more of a voice, a little bit more input into what HPP does, because obviously it's actually producing a better car than the Mercedes works team of late. So it's a voice worth listening to more than it was in the past. But they've got a pre-existing relationship as well. They've done this deal well in advance. They know everything that's been discussed about 26 so far, McLaren are privy to based on the terms of their arrangement. And then you've got just a customer, just someone who's literally coming in to buy the engine and fit it into their car. And that's where Alpine's going to be, at least for the first year in 2026, because it's all coming together quite short term.
So overall, Samarth, what do you think? Do you think we'll have a nice, pragmatic, smaller, okay Alpine come 26, or do you think they can do something more? Are you inspired by this direction?
I really hope so, but I'm not convinced. No, I'm not inspired by the direction. It fills me almost with dread a little bit. Yeah, it's what you said, isn't it? You need to control the whole platform at the rear of the car as well, and it's a really important thing. And that, Aston Martin again are doing that. So again, you've got another team that's kind of punching well ahead of Alpine. I'm also confident that kind of Williams can claw back a bit more potential over the next few years. I don't know. I'm not optimistic, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I hope it does go well. We criticise this team quite a bit, but this is a team that overall, I have a lot of respect for. What they've done at Enstone over the years has been brilliant. There's still good people there. They've lost some people, obviously, over the years, and this goes well back before the Renault days in terms of that period where Genio Capital owned it, and later on they were struggling massively financially. And I just like them to have some stability and the ability to do what they can do and maximise their potential, because it's not a team full of idiots by any stretch of imagination. Very accomplished people there who I think deserve every shot to show how much they can do. So let's hope it goes perhaps a little bit better than might be expected. Well, thanks to Scott and Samarth. I'm sure there's plenty of news to come in this gap in the calendar, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
Did you know users searched football on eBay.com last season 12,000 times per hour? That's some serious searching. eBay has been the home of collectibles since 1995 and is the largest online marketplace for trading cards. Premium trading card singles, live card breaks, unique game-used memorabilia, all the epic finds you need are right here on eBay. Collect with confidence by downloading the eBay app on the App Store or by going straight to ebay.com/theathletic. That's ebay.com/theathletic. Come through and collect with us today. As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.